Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to continue today with the subject of Israel, especially the context being the war between Israel and Hamas. And I have to state without any equivocation that I'm totally on the side of Israel, that when people say that Israel is just committing war crimes by bombing and taking out all the things that Hamas has built, it's not a war crime at all. And they've done their very, very best to remove the people. They've sent warnings, they've made many phone calls, they've sent WhatsApp messages, they have sent flyers, and it's because I've been following it very intensely and also looking at some of the things that Muslims themselves have posted, where they are beside themselves because the Hamas will not allow many of the Palestinians to move south because they use them as human shields. So it looks as if Israel is a disgraceful place to kill civilians. But you know, there's a big difference between war and murder. In war, there's a target being a military installation or something of that nature. And it's not specifically targeted towards a human being. It targets something that is military. Whereas murder is exactly what Hamas did when they invaded Israel on the 7th of October. And when they went in through the Gaza Strip with this plan that was probably given to them by Iran, and all the drones and the other things that were used in the plan, the way it was done, was definitely Iran behind it. And in that, you saw people actually going in, murdering civilians, going into homes, burning them down if the people wouldn't come out, beheading babies, burning babies alive. The atrocities and this didn't come from Israel. It certainly isn't propaganda. This is something that Hamas themselves put on video for the world to see. And there's also an audio that I'm sure you've heard where a young man, and I actually had compassion on him, I really did, but he was using the cell phone of a woman he'd murdered, and he was phoning home. And he spoke about how he had murdered them, and he said he'd killed 10 Jews, and the excitement in his voice was intense. So why was I sorry for him? Because at the end of the conversation, he said, and this is obviously the translation, he said it in Arabic, but he said, "Dad, are you proud of me? Are you proud of me, Dad?" And really he was doing the one thing that he thought could make his father proud of him. And his mother in the background was saying, "Come home now, leave it, just come back home." And she was obviously worried for her son. But his father was commending him and saying, I can't remember if he said stay there, but anyway, he commended his son for the murders. Now that is murder. When you target somebody who's not in any form of warfare, you're targeting them with a gun, a knife, a flamethrower, something like that, to kill them simply because they're of another race. That is not war. That is murder. What Israel is doing in retaliation is not to kill. They could just decimate Gaza in a couple of airstrikes. They're not doing that. What they have targeted are the tunnels. They found the tunnels, 500 miles worth of tunnels that Hamas had dug, and where they found them right underneath in the basement of hospitals. They found them right next to schools. They found, but you can find all this stuff yourself if you just want to go online and look for it. However, it's in the light of that I'm actually showing you how some of these things fit into biblical prophecy, and how if we want the blessing of God on our lives, we need to be standing with Israel. And when we stand with somebody, if somebody's our friend, we don't necessarily agree with everything that they do. Renee not only works for me and has done for 11 years, she's a friend of mine. And so even though there might be things that she does that I disagree with, even if she does things that I don't agree with, that's not going to cause my friendship with her to diminish. And with no matter who it is, a friend, a marriage partner, your own child, somebody in your family, anybody that you are very close to, the fact that you're close to them does not mean that you agree 100% with everything they do. and yet you don't take your friendship from them. And in the same way, there might be things that you absolutely don't agree with Israel on, but that does not mean that you stop being her friend. God has told us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. He's also said that he set watchmen on her walls, and that we're to intercede day and night and give him no peace until he establishes Jerusalem as the glory of all the earth. And so we need to understand that God is with the Jewish people, and I'm going to give you some scriptures about that right now. So last time I gave you a bunch of scriptures out of Isaiah, out of Amos, and a couple of different places, but I specifically want to look at Ezekiel today. And there's much. One of the things he does in Ezekiel 36 is he prophesies to the mountains of Israel. The heading is a prophecy to the mountains of Israel. So I'm not going to go into all that, the mountains, the ravines, the rivers, and so on. But he does say this in verse 8, and this is God speaking. He says, "But you, O mountains of Israel, will produce branches and fruit for my people Israel, for they will soon come back home. I am concerned for you." Now he's talking again to the land. "I am concerned for you and will look on you with favor. You will be plowed and sown. And I will multiply the number of people upon you, even the whole house of Israel. The towns will be inhabited and the ruins rebuilt. I will increase the number of men and animals upon you, and they will be fruitful and become prosperous. I will settle people on you as in the past, and I will make you prosper more than before. Then you will know that I am the Lord. I will cause people, my people Israel, to walk upon you. They will possess you, and you will be their inheritance. You will never again deprive them of their children." And so here is the promise from God that he is going to take Israel and he's going to plant her in her own land, and there's going to be great prosperity and cultivation of the land. And he said, "I'm going to make you more prosperous than you were before." And we need to remember how prosperous Solomon was, so that the Queen of Sheba came from Africa to come along, and she said the half wasn't even told me. She was so overawed when she saw everything that was in Solomon's palace and heard his wisdom and so on. And then you can read, when I say you can read, that's a silly thing to say. I mean, I encourage you to read the whole of Ezekiel 36, 37, 38. You know about the restoration and the valley of dry bones, and how he questions Ezekiel. He says, "Can these dry bones live?" And Ezekiel goes, "Well, you know, Lord." And so you just see what happens, and how all those bones that were dead come back to life and stand up as a mighty army. And that is the whole nation of Israel that God brings back again. Then God says this to Israel. He says, "Therefore say to the house," this is Ezekiel 36 and verse 22. He says, "Therefore say to the house of Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says. It is not for your sake, O house of Israel, that I'm going to do these things, but for the sake of my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations where you've gone. I will show the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, the name you have profaned among them. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the sovereign Lord, when I show myself holy through you before their eyes. For I will take you out of the nations, I will gather you back from all the countries, and bring you back into your own land. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and to be careful to keep my laws." And so I want you to notice something about what I've just read. And that is, he says, "I'm going to bring you back to the land, and then I'm going to sprinkle clean water upon you." So it's not as if Israel was going to turn back to God and all of them were going to become Bible-believing Jews, because there are many secular Jews who live in Israel and who've been brought back to the land, although there are also a large number of observant Jews in the land of Israel. But what he said is, I'm going to bring you back basically as you are. And you know, in Christianity, there's a song we sing, just as I am without one plea, and how we can come to Jesus as we are. We don't have to perfect ourselves before we go to Jesus to be saved. We come just as we are. And that's exactly what God said to Israel. I'm going to bring you back. And when I've got you back in the land, then I'm going to sprinkle clean water on you. And I'm going to give you a new heart and a new spirit. I'm going to take out of you your heart of stone. A heart of stone would be just a stony heart, and many Christians even have that, where we don't really care, we don't have compassion for the things of God. We don't really look at God's holiness. It's like stone. But once we've got a heart of flesh, all that changes. That is when we become transformed into the image of Jesus. And so he says to the Jewish people, when you're in the land, this is what I'm going to do to you. But you know, we don't ever know God's time frame. We know that it's now over 70 years since they came back into the land. I think it's 75 years now. Yeah, because they came back and they became a nation on the 14th of May, 1948. And so it's 75 years now. And so they've been brought back, and they're still coming back. They're still coming back from different nations, as there's a great wave of anti-Semitism that is rising up worldwide. It is the most shocking thing to look at cities in the different nations of the world, the capital cities, and how people of that nation are marching in pro-Palestinian marches, and they're chanting things like, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean River, there's not going to be an Israel. In other words, they're chanting with the Palestinians that they don't want to see any Jews in the land. When you do that, you are aligning yourself against God, and that is an extremely dangerous thing to do. We have to show ourselves to be people who know what the Word of God says. For some of you, in reading this, it's the first time you've heard it. And this is why we need to read the Bible, so we know what the prophetic scriptures say, because when God says, I'm going to do it, he's going to do it. I want to pause here, and I want to actually read you the Mark Twain quotes that I spoke about last time. And I didn't give them to you, but subsequently I've looked them up. And especially in light of what Ezekiel had said, I've just read it to you, when he prophesied to the mountains, and he said, I'm concerned for you and will look on you with favor. You will be plowed and sown, and I will multiply the number of people upon you, even the whole house of Israel. But if you look before, it speaks about how the land in Ezekiel 36, about how the land is so ravaged and it's almost a worthless land. And when in 1867, when Mark Twain, that was actually his nom de plume. He was an author and he used the name Mark Twain, but his real name was Samuel Clemens. And he went with a church group from America, and he went and traveled through Europe and the Middle East. And he was looking forward to going into the Holy Land, even though he was always a skeptic. But when he was there, he bought his mother a Bible, and he had Jerusalem inscribed in Hebrew for her on the cover. And she also wrote in the Bible. But anyway, we're just talking about him. And this is what he wrote when he got back. He said, the word Palestine remember the land was called Palestine in those days, although the pilgrims and the church people, the Christians and the Jews who went to visit, always called it the Holy Land. But he says the word Palestine always brought to my mind a vague suggestion of a country as large as the United States, he began. I do not know why, but such was the case. I suppose it was because I could not conceive of a small country having so large a history. And it does have the largest history of any country on earth. And then just a little bit more. Riding on horseback through the valley of Jezreel, Twain observed, there is not a solitary village throughout its whole extent, not for 30 miles in either direction. There are 2 or 3 small clusters of Bedouin tents, but not a single permanent habitation. One may ride 10 miles hereabouts and not see 10 human beings. And he wrote on, and he said that Palestine, he said Jerusalem was just like a pauper village. And he spoke about quite a number of things, but he was desperately disappointed. And this is one of the things that you'll find, that the followers of Islam hate to read those quotes. In fact, they say that they've been taken out of context, because what it shows is that before the Jews came in and actually cultivated the land, rebuilt it, as Ezekiel said would happen. He said, you're going to plow, and he said, I'm going to make you prosperous. You're going to be more prosperous than you ever were before. And in Isaiah, I'd read to you about how, and in Amos, about how they were going to take root and they were going to spread their fruit all over the land. That was how much fruit they were going to produce. And how just everything was going to bloom. The desert was going to bloom under Israeli cultivation. And so when you hear people talk about Palestine, and the Palestinian people talk about their homes and their lands and everything that the Jews had stolen from them, there was essentially nothing there. There were just a few little Bedouin tents, because the Bedouin are nomadic people, but there weren't cities. There weren't even villages. It was just, in fact, the whole population in the late 1800s in Palestine, the entire population was 350,000 in estimation. So that's not even 500,000 people in the whole of the land. And now they're 8 or 9 million. And so this story that is told to people that Israel are occupiers of the land, that the land was theirs, and they'd done if it was so, they've done nothing with it. When Gaza was given back to the Palestinians in 2005, from that time until this, which is 18 years, there has not been a Jew in Gaza. And so much money was pumped into Gaza to begin to be able to make it more just to really advance the people, to uplift the people. There was millions, in fact, billions given. And instead of it being used for the sake of the population, Hamas, who were voted into power in 2006, and I think it's very similar to the ANC in this country, where people are too scared not to vote ANC. Because they're actually afraid that if they'll be burned to the ground, their houses will be burned and they'll be murdered if they don't do what they're told. And I think that it's very similar in the Gaza Strip. But in any case, so Hamas was voted into power, and there hasn't been an election since 2006. So it's not a democracy. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. So it's not a democracy. And instead of using everything that was brought in and all the funding that came in many different areas in order to actually uplift the population and build beautiful cities and plant and cultivate and do everything that Israel did, you can look at what the cities they were like when they were handed over, and they were beautiful, flourishing cities. But under Hamas rule, the only thing that's been developed are places from which they can launch rockets, from where warfare can be conducted. And they've done this among schools and hospitals, and there's evidence. It's been uncovered, and there's video evidence of where these things are and what was found. And so it was done in a very densely populated civilian area, so that if Israel tried to retaliate by aiming at a military establishment, they were bound to kill civilians. And that is because instead of building bomb shelters for their people to hide in, I saw a video of Palestinian children and women being dragged and put in places where the airstrikes were happening, so that they could then parade these unfortunate people and say, look what Israel has done, they've killed civilians. And so we need to understand the whole context of the war that we're fighting. And God said it was for his holy name. He said, Israel, it's not for your sake I'm doing this. He said, it's for my holy name. And so Jerusalem is the city that carries the name of God. God set his name there. He set his name in the temple. And that is why this entire conflict is raging around the Temple Mount, because essentially it is a war for worship. It's a war for supremacy. It's a war to see who is greater, God or Satan. It's that simple. You know, the Palestinians and the Muslims call America the great Satan, and they call Israel the little Satan. But in reality, the real enemy of God is not the Jewish people. The Jewish people and the Christian people, what the Quran calls the Saturday people and the Sunday people, all who need to be killed. Those are the ones who are on the side of God. We are those who are followers of God, who believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, the Son of God. Not all Jews by any means believe in that Jesus is the Messiah. They're still going to, it says they're going to look upon him whom they pierced, and they're going to mourn. And there's going to be a great outpouring of God's Spirit right towards the end. And we are getting towards the end. This war could easily escalate into the final global war. But it's very, very exciting. I'm going to tell you about why jihadists have to start a global war. That is part of their end-time eschatology. God bless you. Sorry to go a minute or so over.